Right, good morning, ladies and gents, boys and girls. It's actually the day after, so it's actually the 11th, but we went to London on the 10th, which was yesterday, for the tractor rally, which I will show you some of the scenes from in a second. Just wanted to say before we get into this, if you haven't already subscribed, please do, because it's completely free, and if you do enjoy any part of this, please hit the like button. And if anybody's got any questions, any thoughts, or any support, please leave it in the comments. But we will jump to the views in Westminster now, and then we'll catch up after for a chat.
I'm joined now by Jacob Walker, a farmer who was at that protest today, and you will remember him. He came into the studio back in November now.
Yes.
That's gone really quickly, hasn't it?
Massively
the first
quickly,
protest in Westminster, and you've kindly agreed to come back in and speak to us today after this protest. I have to admit, Jacob, in those 3 months, it doesn't feel like anything's changed.
I partially agree. I think that we've gained quite a bit of public support.
Yeah.
And I think that within there's obviously several groups that are rallying against this, and I think that we've got the message across, and I think that we've won the tax side of the argument. We've just got to try and get the government on board at the same time, as well as the public support.
Because it keeps coming down to this sticking point, isn't it? And I'm sure all farmers now, well, you were before sort of becoming tax experts, such as the nature of your industry, but even more so now. And it just keeps coming back to this argument where the government is saying, look, with these allowances, X, Y, and Z, it creeps up. So actually, a very small percentage of farmers will be affected by this change in inheritance tax. Looking at those numbers of people down there, you guys strongly disagree with this. What kind of numbers do you think it will affect? Will it affect you personally?
The latest study that I think was done in the last couple of weeks was 75%. So obviously, massive increase on the 30% or so that the government think it's going to be.
Hugely at odds with what the government is saying.
And I think that ultimately, when you look at the government and the fact that, between their own government departments with DEFRA and the other agencies, they can't actually decide between themselves on what numbers that they actually are. So rather than listening to the people in the field, the various farming, NFU and other departments, they're just trying to clutch at straws and say that actually it's 3 million when it starts at 1 million. And ultimately, if the stars align, you get the 3 million. But for the vast majority, you're not going to get the 3 million. You're going to be at the baseline 1 million. For me personally, it's difficult to say. Yeah. It depends on how long my grandfather lives, and depends on what the market, how the market varies, and how the market plays, and how much we build the business between now and obviously his passing. Because it's not just the agricultural property relief; it's also business relief as well. So
much to take into account when you're trying to run a really difficult business at the moment. It's worth reminding people watching at home, you had to you and thousands of other farmers had to take the day off work today. Yeah. It's not a big jolly up in London.
No, it's a massive dedication.
Putting the farm on hold almost, or putting the responsibility on other people's shoulders for 24 hours so you can come down here. What's it like running your farm at the moment? Just how tough is it?
I think that there's a lot of talk about inflation. I think that all of our input costs have gone up with inflation. And the only thing that hasn't gone up with inflation...
immune to that, is it?
No, the only thing that's not gone up inflation is obviously what we sell on. You look at a litre of milk, it's the same price it was 10 years ago. You look at 10 kilos worth of beef, it's much the same as what it was 10 years ago. And yet the input costs to make that has skyrocketed with inflation, and yet our profits just haven't.
What about the stress it's putting on you and your young family? I just met your wife before we came on air, and your little boy, Hunter, just 9 months.
It's a worry, isn't it? I mean, ultimately we're doing it for little return, and we weren't here before this change in relief. So we weren't rallying against the fact that we're not making any money, because we enjoy what we do and we do it for the next generation. So then it makes you sit there thinking,
you're not in it to turn a profit, and I hear that from so many farmers. You're not really in it to
no, I'm in it so
to
I
make
can,
a fortune.
you know, eventually pass it to my son should he wish to do that. You know, and ultimately you then sit there and you think, well, what's the point? If he's going to lose 20% of that, where do you draw the line between you're doing something for the next generation, but ultimately the government want a piece of that, and it's more, I think, land than it is the money. But
you feel like you've won the tax argument, the government just aren't listening. What about the buying and producing British produce in this country? I mean, you know, after the first protest, a lot of the major supermarket chains came out to back farmers, Waitrose, Tesco, Aldi and the like. Government's still not listening to that. What would you say to them about the future of British produce in terms of, you know, talking about feeding the nation? I've seen the slogan, Sir Keir Starmer, don't bite the hand that feeds. Why is buying, producing, eating British produce so important?
I think you've only got to look at World War II to understand that importing your food, any vast quantity of food, and you're relying on imports, is not a good place for any nation to be at, really, because you don't know what's in the future, whether World War III could ever happen or whatever. So you would think that we'd learn from our previous mistakes, but clearly they're not taking into account what happened previously.
And all this, there is an argument to say, you know, farming needs to modernise, it needs to move with the times. You're already doing that, aren't you?
I would agree, yeah. You can't not move with the times. I think that the argument of moving with the times is just buying them some time, I think, personally.
Jacob, how long is this going to continue for?
How long's a piece of string? I think that ultimately I think personally they may back down on the BPR relief. I think they might.
Remind us what BPR is again?
Business property relief. I think they're going to back down on that because if they don't, they're going to lose too many seats. They're going to lose too many votes, basically. And I think that's what it comes down to. The agricultural property relief, I'm 50-50. I don't. Time will tell. But the one thing I do know is that we're very resilient as farmers, and we will just keep coming back.
And very loud and getting your
very
points
loud
across
and very
today.
bigger. And you know, we filled Whitehall and some today. So every time it's getting larger. You know, it's a bit of an embarrassment on the government to have that outside their doors, but...
Okay. Well, listen, Jacob, really appreciate you coming in again with your young family, staying in London late to talk to us tonight. But such is the cause you are fighting for. We really appreciate it, Jacob. Good luck, and we'll talk again in the future, I know it.
Yes,
okay, thank you, Jacob.
Right, so as you would have seen, there was a lot of tractors. Actually, a lot. We filled Whitehall completely, which hasn't been done before. I would say there was a lot less people. More, I would say, of the elderly or older generations were there, rather than the younger generations, which I think had a much more deep and meaningful impact than a load of the young people, which would be controversial, but it is what it is. But I don't want to turn this channel into a political nightmare. I don't want to get too in depth about all the political issues in the country and what's facing farmers. However, I think it's important that everybody understands that this isn't a loophole that's been closed. I mean, the government, you know, I watched the whole of the debate last night, which there was a lot of good arguments, and, you know, ultimately a petition that has been signed 150,000 times, and not one of the agricultural ministers could turn up. Not one. There wasn't a single DEFRA minister there. There was just it was a bit of a poor performance on Labour's behalf if they're trying to make out like they're working with us, which is a complete scam, because otherwise they would have had some ministers there that actually were involved in agriculture and actually their roots were deeper than just being a Labour MP, which of course they don't want to stand up for anything other than what Labour stand for, because otherwise they'll get sacked and lose their role as a minister. And the loophole, look, this was never a tax loophole. It was never brought in as a loophole for people to not pay tax. It was brought in as a fundamental relief that was needed to ensure that the likes of food rationing in World War II didn't happen again, and that the country as a whole learned from its previous mistakes to ensure that food security was there, because ultimately without food security the nation's ruined. You're on food rations, and then after that, if you ain't got enough food to feed people, then there's no point having the public sectors, because you can't survive with no food. But that being said, if you go with the second argument of that they're doing this to close up the apparent loophole for the likes of James Dyson and all those the big corporations that are going to buy all the farmland to avoid tax, they're still going to buy it to avoid tax, because they're still got a big enough tax relief that it's still apparent to them that they're going to be paying a lot less tax should they just go and buy more farmland. So the farms that have got to sell fields to pay for this tax are going to be brought up by the likes of James Dyson, Jeremy Clarkson and Bill Gates, because to them it's still a generous tax relief to them. So it's not actually the fundamentals of the policy hasn't got to the argument that they put forward. But they just can't. They just can't, and they can't seem to come to an agreement of what this policy is actually there for, which, in my opinion, is for the land. There's no two ways about it. They're talking about building 1.5 million homes. They're talking about 1 million acres of solar panels on farmland. And what's going to be the interesting thing to me is the quickest and easiest way for them to get hold of land is to force farmers to sell it. Now, they say that it's going to drive the market price down by introducing this because the likes of Jeremy Clarkson isn't going to buy the farmland, but that to me is just total bollocks, because it's not so much the likes of them. There's not that many rich people in this country that are going to be, buying farmland left, right and centre to avoid paying inheritance tax, so that when their daughter or son inherits it, tax-free, and they decide that they want the money out of it, they're still going to get taxed 40% capital gains anyway. So it's still not a loophole. It just means that they're not paying inheritance tax. But it doesn't get to the fundamentals of the issue, that you're then talking that farmers are going to be selling their land, and then the likes of GB Energy, which have recently announced that they want a whole load of chunk of land for solar panels, they're just going to come and buy it. So to me, it's got nothing to do with the £500 million that it raises in the next 3 years. It's not £500 million a year. It's only going to raise £136 million in the first year. Well, in terms of government GDPR spending, that's about 0.001%. So it's the figures are minuscule in terms of what they spend and in terms of what they raise. So then you ask yourself, as a government, why would you want 1,400 tractors sat on Westminster, being broadcast across the world to make yourself look quite ridiculous and in a quite vulnerable position, where they're thinking, right, if we get enough imports in that country and can push the farmers out, then we're going to be, raking in the cash because they can charge a premium, which we can't. And that's the other thing, is that everybody, there's a lot of arguments across social media that the issues are with the fact that we're not getting enough money for our food, which I agree. I do agree that the price of stuff hasn't gone up with inflation. But the problem is, you can't go after the supermarkets and say, right, we want X and X for a certain amount of kilos of beef, when they can just import it cheaper than we could ever produce it. So ultimately, going after the supermarket saying, right, we want more money, is just going to mean that we're even less in a sustainable position, because they could just go and import it elsewhere for half the price. So how do you... The thing is with a farming business is it's never going to be a viable business in terms of capital, in terms of the capital that you're going to get back out of the asset. And this is the issue, that nobody is going to get into it with a 1% return on their £1 million that they've invested. That's the most ludicrous idea that anyone could ever think of. Let alone the fact that, it's society isn't willing to pay the extra premium, which I don't blame them. Everyone's pushed just as tight as each other, and if you went to your local supermarket and your shopping was £20 more a week, that's going to add up pretty quick over even 10 weeks. It adds up pretty quick for the average consumer, which is not really where we want to be. But we weren't in Westminster before this announcement because as farmers we're just resilient and we just carry on going. I think the whole policy is ridiculous. I think that there's a clawback scheme that they do in certain countries where, should I inherit a farm, I then sell the farm, they claw back their inheritance tax. I think that's the only way forward. I think that's exactly what Labour needs to do, because it would get rid of this loophole that they claim, and it would mean that actually, unless that farmland is sold for the money asset of it, then there's no inheritance tax. And should someone sell it to reap the benefit of the millions of pounds that's tied up in it, backdate the inheritance tax, doesn't matter. But anyway, I'm not going to get on too much of a political debate. I've said what I need to say, and we're going to move on from it and go back to the regular content that's a bit more exciting and a bit less depressing. So I will catch up with you in the next one. Hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, your thoughts, and I'll put a load of stuff on screen about all the various figures and such. But I will see you in the next one.
Kids are his biggest fans, so it's a real damn shame they'll never see an edge of this land. He keeps his pain locked up inside, while the thought of losing everything eats away his mind. So at night he cries out to his wife, baby, what are we gonna do if I die? And where the hell are the kids gonna play when inheritance tax takes it all away? What the hell are we gonna do when there's no work left for me and you? When are they gonna realize this is all we've known for a whole damn lives? No farmers, no food, no future. The government just don't seem to care. Looking at the farmers from a big room with comfy chairs makes it so hard to believe the truth as I watch the betrayal of the ones that provide your food. So where